The crisp green bills, $600 exactly, fanned out on the polished marble counter of the daily grind. A stark, almost obscene contrast to the steaming milk and clatter of ceramic that defined Chloe Davies's world. Sunlight, sharp and golden through the broad Brooklyn windows, caught the edges of the $100 notes, making them glow with an almost ethereal, dangerous allure. Julian Vance, a man whose bespoke navy suit looked as out of place here as a diamond in a coffee bean, pushed them closer, his gaze unwavering, yet shadowed by something profoundly lonely that made his deep-set eyes seem to hold an entire, untold history. His presence, even amidst the vibrant morning rush, felt like a sudden, unexpected silence in a symphony of chatter. "Here's $600. His voice, though surprisingly soft, cut through the cafe's morning hum like a finely sharpened blade. It was a voice accustomed to being obeyed, to dictating terms in boardrooms, not proposing absurdities over a frothy latte. "Would you pretend to be my girlfriend for one day?" Chloe Davies, a barista barely in her early 20s, paused mid-pour. Her blonde hair, usually pulled back in a practical ponytail, now escaping in soft tendrils around her face, reflecting the shock that widened her eyes. The steam wand hissed a final, mournful breath as the latte she was crafting overflowed slightly, a minor casualty of the sudden, mind-bending request. Disbelief warred with a strange, undeniable flicker of desperation within her. $600. $600 was a month's rent on her tiny, sunless apartment in Astoria. $600 was Leo's new chemistry textbook, the one he'd mentioned with a wistful sigh, knowing it was an extravagance their meager budget couldn't afford. Chloe worked 2 jobs, sometimes 3. Her days a relentless blur of caffeine, customer smiles, and late-night shifts at a diner that smelled perpetually of old fries. Her hands, usually deft and swift, now trembled slightly, a testament to the internal earthquake Julian's words had caused. She nursed a secret ambition, a dream as fragile and precious as spun glass, to become a photojournalist. Her worn Nikon, a gift from her late grandmother, lay dormant in her apartment, a silent testament to a passion postponed, an ambition sacrificed on the altar of responsibility. Her younger brother, Leo, a brilliant spark of a human being, had just started his first semester at New York University, a feat that felt both miraculous and terrifyingly expensive. Every single dollar Chloe earned, every single cent she saved, was meticulously allocated, stretched thin across the vast chasm of tuition fees, living expenses, and the constant fear of being late on the rent for their shared Queens apartment. Her father, a ghost in their lives since he'd abandoned them years ago, had left behind a legacy of debt and a gaping hole in their family structure that Chloe, just a teenager then, had tried valiantly to fill. Julian Vance watched her, a faint, almost imperceptible tremor passing through his impeccably tailored suit jacket. He was a man accustomed to having answers before questions were even fully formed, to orchestrating complex deals worth millions. Yet now, under Chloe's shocked, honest gaze, he felt a peculiar, unfamiliar vulnerability. He could see the calculations flashing in her eyes, the warring emotions, the fierce integrity fighting with a desperate, underlying need. It was a dynamic he rarely encountered in his world of polished surfaces and performative smiles. He, Julian Vance, the ruthless tech CEO of Vanguard Dynamics, had built an empire on innovation and an uncompromising will. His name commanded respect, fear, and admiration in equal measure. Yet behind the public persona, there was a profound emptiness, a loneliness that gnawed at him, especially in the quiet hours of his sprawling, silent penthouse. He cleared his throat, the sound a low rumble in the quiet space that had formed around them, as if the cafe's usual hum had dimmed specifically to amplify this extraordinary exchange. "It's a business proposal, Miss Davies," he reiterated, attempting to lend an air of corporate legitimacy to the outlandish request. His eyes, the color of a stormy sea, held hers. "A mere 24 hours, my mother's Diamond Jubilee Gala upstate in Saratoga Springs, an unavoidable social obligation." He omitted the part about his family's relentless probing into his non-existent love life, the suffocating expectations that he produce a suitable partner, and the recent humiliating public breakup with Serena Albright, a socialite whose ambition rivaled his own. Attending alone, he knew, would be an exercise in emotional self-flagellation. Chloe's mind raced, a whirlwind of moral objections battling against the stark reality of her bank account. Feigning affection, stepping into a world so far removed from her own, felt deeply unsettling, a violation of the authentic self she fought so hard to maintain. She was a woman who valued truth, who saw the world through the honest lens of her camera. This felt like a betrayal of that very principle. Yet Leo's upcoming tuition payment, a date circled in angry red on her calendar, loomed large, a monstrous weight on her shoulders. She pictured his earnest face, the quiet sacrifices he was already making to pursue his dream. She thought of her mother, whose weary smiles hid a lifetime of quiet struggle. Could she, Chloe, really turn down $600 that could ease their burden even if it meant sacrificing a small piece of herself? The thought was a bitter pill. A long, silent moment stretched between them. The clatter of espresso cups, the murmur of conversations, the rhythmic grind of coffee beans, all faded to a distant hum, as if the entire world was holding its breath, waiting for her answer. Julian, in that suspended silence, saw the flicker of capitulation, the quiet surrender to necessity. It was a look he knew well, one he often saw in the eyes of desperate entrepreneurs or employees trying to keep their jobs. But in Chloe, it was different. It was a surrender not to greed, but to love, the love for her family. Finally, after what felt like an eternity, Chloe swallowed hard, the corners of her mouth twitching in a hesitant, almost imperceptible movement. She nodded, a single reluctant dip of her chin. The $600 suddenly felt not just like a lifeline, but a heavy burning weight in her hands, a down payment on a 24-hour illusion. The following morning, the transformation was so profound, it felt like a dream. Chloe Davies, the barista of the daily grind, was gone. In her place stood a woman draped in a designer gown, a shimmering midnight blue that clung to her modest frame with unexpected elegance. Julian had arranged for it all with a discreet efficiency that bordered on clinical. A dress, shoes, a subtle professional makeup artist who had enhanced her features without erasing her natural beauty. Her usually simple makeup was expertly applied. Her blonde hair, typically confined to a functional ponytail, now styled in soft, cascading waves that framed her face with an unfamiliar sophistication. She gazed at her reflection, a stranger, staring back from the gilded mirror of the Saratoga Springs hotel suite Julian had booked for her. The girl who rescued stray cats in Astoria, who knew the names of all her regulars, who dreamed of capturing life's raw, honest moments with her camera, was now an imposter, ready to step onto the grand stage of the Vance family's Diamond Jubilee Gala. The sprawling Vance estate was a symphony of opulence, a majestic edifice of old money and inherited power. Manicured lawns stretched into the distance, dotted with ancient oaks, and a grand fountain played a watery melody in the crisp autumn air. As the sleek black limousine purred to a halt, Chloe felt a sudden surge of acute self-consciousness, a stark reminder of the chasm between her world and this one. She clutched the borrowed clutch bag, her palms damp. Julian, beside her, looked every inch the powerful CEO, his face a mask of practiced composure. He offered her his arm, a gesture both formal and oddly reassuring. Julian's mother, Eleanor Vance, a formidable matriarch with eyes that missed nothing and a smile that rarely reached them, greeted them at the entrance to the ballroom. Her silver hair, perfectly coiffed, shone under the grand chandeliers, and her sapphire necklace gleamed like captured starlight. She extended a perfectly manicured hand, her grip surprisingly firm. "Julian, darling, and this must be Chloe." Her voice was cultured, smooth as polished silk, but her gaze, sharp and penetrating, swept over Chloe, assessing, dissecting, seeking out the cracks in her facade. It was a polite yet scrutinizing welcome, a silent interrogation that made Chloe feel like an exhibit under glass. Across the opulent ballroom, a man with a reputation for sharp elbows and an even sharper tongue watched them with a predatory gleam in his eyes. This was Marcus Thorne, Julian's cousin, a man whose ambition was as boundless as his resentment of Julian's success. A smirk played on Marcus's lips, a silent promise of future trouble, a dark premonition that Chloe instantly registered. The air in the ballroom was thick with unspoken expectations and veiled judgments, a world where every gesture was a calculated performance, every smile a potential weapon. Chloe felt the weight of it, the intricate dance of social politics, the invisible rules that governed this glittering cage. Yet to her own surprise, Chloe navigated it with an unexpected grace. Perhaps it was the years spent listening to countless customers' stories, honing a genuine interest in people, in the nuances of their lives. Or perhaps it was the sheer force of her own integrity shining through the borrowed finery. She spoke eloquently when prompted, not about the high society gossip that filled the room, but about her passion for photography, her observations of city life, the vibrant street art in Bushwick, the quiet dignity of the old men playing chess in Washington Square Park. She even managed to disarm Eleanor Vance, a woman rumored to be as cold as ice, with a story about a stray cat she once rescued in Astoria, its paw caught in a discarded fishing net. He was just so vulnerable, Chloe had explained, her voice soft, her eyes shining with genuine empathy. Eleanor had listened, her expression unreadable. Then, to Julian's astonishment, a rare, almost imperceptible spark of admiration had flickered in her eyes. It was a testament to Chloe's quiet strength, her innate ability to connect on a human level, cutting through the layers of pretense. Julian watched, a silent observer in his own life, captivated. He saw past the borrowed dress, the temporary facade, glimpsing the fierce intelligence and compassionate heart that resided within Chloe. Her honesty, her lack of artifice, was like a cool balm to his perpetually guarded soul. What began as a transactional arrangement, a cold business proposal, slowly, imperceptibly began to unravel his carefully constructed emotional walls. He found himself not only admiring her, but feeling a protectiveness, a sense of quiet gratitude he hadn't experienced in years. The pretense of their relationship was blurring, replaced by a nascent respect and an undeniable growing attraction that felt both exhilarating and terrifying. The $600, that initial currency of their deception, now felt like a paltry sum for the profound gift she was unknowingly offering him, a glimpse into genuine human connection. But the fragile truce of their fake relationship, the quiet understanding they were building, was a delicate thing, constantly under threat by the watchful eyes of those who would see Julian fall, and the very real possibility of their secret being exposed. The evening was long and the true tests were yet to come. The grand ballroom hummed with the symphony of affluence, a delicate blend of clinking champagne flutes, hushed laughter, and the soft strains of a live string quartet. After Eleanor Vance's coolly appraising welcome, Julian had steered Chloe through the elegant throng, introducing her with practiced ease to a dizzying array of investors, philanthropists, and distant relatives, whose names blurred into a polite, forgettable drone. Chloe, however, possessed an uncanny ability to find the human beneath the veneer. She didn't just nod and smile. She listened. She asked genuine questions. Her eyes, often hidden behind the steam of espresso machines, now sparkled with an authentic curiosity. A renowned art collector found himself discussing the vibrant street art of Bushwick with her, rather than the abstract expressionists he typically championed. An elderly senator, usually reserved, shared an anecdote about his pet pug. Julian watched her, a silent sentinel by her side, a strange warmth spreading through his chest. He saw the genuine connections she forged, the way people's expressions softened in her presence. It was a stark contrast to the transactional interactions he was accustomed to, the calculated networking that dominated his world. This was not a performance for Chloe. It was simply how she moved through the world, authentically engaged. But the illusion, however gracefully maintained, was fragile, a delicate glass slipper in a room full of sharp edges. The first of those edges emerged from the shadow of a Corinthian column. Marcus Thorne, Julian's cousin, detached himself from a group of fawning associates, his designer suit fitting him with an almost aggressive precision. His smile, when it came, was a razor's edge, too wide, too knowing. "Julian, my dear cousin," Marcus purred, his voice like expensive whiskey, smooth, but with a lingering burn. He extended a hand to Chloe, his gaze sweeping over her, lingering for an extra second, a micro-expression of disdain flickering in his eyes before it was expertly veiled. And this must be the infamous Chloe. "I must say, Julian, you've kept her quite the secret. Rather unlike you to be so discreet." Chloe felt a jolt of unease. Infamous? Discreet? The words, though seemingly innocuous, were loaded. She met Marcus's gaze with a polite, unwavering smile. "It's a pleasure to meet you, Mr. Thorne," she replied, her voice calm, betraying none of the internal flutter. Marcus chuckled, a low guttural sound that didn't quite reach his eyes. "Oh, please, Mr. Thorne is far too formal. We're family after all, or soon to be, perhaps. He turned to Julian, a playful glint in his eyes that didn't hide the underlying challenge. You know how Mother is, Julian. Always pushing for you to settle down. I'd almost begun to think you'd given up on the romantic pursuit after your last public entanglement. He subtly emphasized public entanglement, a veiled jab at Julian's recent breakup with Serena. Julian's jaw tightened almost imperceptibly. He placed a hand gently on the small of Chloe's back, a possessive gesture that felt surprisingly natural. Marcus, as charming as your inquisitiveness is, Chloe and I prefer to keep our private lives, well, private. His voice was even, but there was an unmistakable edge to it, a warning Marcus clearly understood. Marcus simply raised an eyebrow, his smirk deepening. Of course, my apologies. Just surprised, you see. One hears things, rumors, about how one might meet a delightful young woman in the most unexpected of places. A cafe, perhaps. His eyes flickered to Chloe, a knowing glint. A charming little place, I hear. The daily grind, isn't it? Chloe's breath hitched. How did he know? Had Julian mentioned it? No, she knew Julian wouldn't. The detail felt too specific, too deliberately placed. Her composure wavered for a fraction of a second, but she quickly reasserted control. It is, she confirmed, her voice steady. A wonderful cafe. I enjoy the ambiance, and their lattes are superb. She offered no further information, no confession, just a simple, unadorned truth. Julian's gaze hardened. Marcus was fishing, trying to expose their fabricated backstory. Marcus, if you'll excuse us, Mother is signaling. He pulled Chloe gently away, but the seed of doubt, of suspicion, had been planted. Chloe felt a shiver of unease. Marcus was not just a rival, he was a meticulous observer, a potential threat. As they moved deeper into the ballroom, away from Marcus's probing eyes, Julian leaned in slightly. He's always looking for an angle, he murmured, his voice low. Don't let him rattle you. Chloe nodded, though her heart still hammered against her ribs. He seems perceptive, she replied, her gaze scanning the room as if expecting Marcus to reappear at any moment. It was then, as if summoned by the very mention of her name, that Serena Albright made her grand entrance. Clad in a scarlet gown that commanded attention, her auburn hair a cascade of perfectly styled waves, she moved with the practiced grace of someone born to command a room. Her eyes, sharp and calculating, immediately locked onto Julian and Chloe. A triumphant yet venomous smile played on her lips as she made a beeline for them, a predator spotting her prey. Julian, darling. Serena's voice was a carefully modulated purr, sweet as honey, yet with an unmistakable undertone of steel. She embraced Julian with an overly familiar hug, then turned her full attention to Chloe, her smile never faltering, yet her eyes filled with a chilling condescension. And you must be Chloe. Such a surprising development. I hadn't realized Julian had broadened his horizons so dramatically. Her gaze swept over Chloe's dress, a barely perceptible flicker of disdain for anything less than haute couture. Though I suppose a change is as good as a rest, isn't it? Chloe felt the weight of Serena's words, each one a tiny, poisoned dart. She knew what this was, a calculated attack, designed to belittle, to humiliate, to expose her as an outsider. She met Serena's gaze, refusing to cower. It's a pleasure to meet you, Miss Albright, Chloe responded, her voice calm, devoid of the emotional reaction Serena clearly expected. Serena chuckled, a brittle sound that grated against the polished elegance of the room. Oh, please, call me Serena. After all, Julian and I were practically family once. You know, Chloe, it's quite the Cinderella story, isn't it? One day serving lattes, the next, darling of the ball. Her voice dripped with saccharine sweetness, but the implication was clear. Chloe was nothing more than a gold digger, an opportunistic cafe girl trying to climb the social ladder through Julian. I'm sure you're enjoying the amenities that come with Julian's company. It's certainly a world away from the daily grind, isn't it? She emphasized the cafe's name, a thinly veiled accusation, clearly hoping to elicit a blush, a stumble, any sign of Chloe's discomfort. A ripple of nervous anticipation spread through the small cluster of guests who had gathered, drawn by the undeniable tension. Julian tensed, his hand instinctively going to Chloe's arm, ready to interject, to shield her from Serena's venom. But Chloe, to his astonishment, remained perfectly still, her composure unshaken. A quiet strength, A dignity he had only glimpsed before now radiated from her. She looked directly at Serena, her gaze steady and clear. "Serena, it is indeed a world away," Chloe began, her voice gaining a quiet resonance that commanded attention. "But I assure you, the daily grind has taught me more about value than any ballroom ever could. It's taught me the dignity of hard work, the beauty of everyday moments, and the privilege of genuinely connecting with people, regardless of their social standing or the labels they carry." Her words, delivered without malice or defensiveness, were a subtle but powerful rebuke. There's a unique kind of wealth in seeing the genuine smiles of regular customers, in understanding their stories, in knowing that a simple cup of coffee can brighten someone's day. That's a connection that money cannot buy, and one that I value deeply. A stunned silence fell over the small group. Serena's carefully constructed facade faltered for a fraction of a second, her triumphant smirk replaced by a flicker of genuine surprise, perhaps even a hint of discomfiture. Chloe hadn't retaliated with insults or emotional outbursts. Instead, she had simply eloquently asserted her own worth and the integrity of her experiences. Julian, witnessing Chloe's unshakable composure, felt a profound shift within him. It was as if a blindfold had been lifted. The $600 he had offered was merely an entry ticket, he realized, to something far more valuable, an encounter with authentic humanity. He had expected her to crumble, to blush, to expose the fragile nature of their arrangement. Instead, she had stood tall, not only defending herself, but subtly challenging Serena's entire worldview. He found himself not only admiring her, but feeling a protectiveness he hadn't experienced in years, a deep respect that transcended the bounds of their agreed-upon charade. The pretense of their relationship was blurring, replaced by a nascent respect and an undeniable growing attraction that felt both exhilarating and terrifying. Just then, a figure emerged from the periphery of the gathering, drawn by the subtle drama. It was Eleanor Vance, Julian's mother, her sharp eyes having missed none of the exchange. She approached, her expression inscrutable, yet a rare spark of admiration flickered in her gaze as it rested on Chloe. "Chloe, my dear," Eleanor said, her voice softer than it had been earlier, a note of genuine warmth subtly present. "That was an insightful perspective. It seems you have a gift for seeing beyond the obvious." She turned to Serena, her voice chilling slightly. "Serena, it seems some lessons can only be learned outside the confines of our gilded cage." It was a rare public chastisement from Eleanor, and Serena, momentarily stunned, offered a tight, forced smile before retreating, her plans to humiliate Chloe thoroughly thwarted. Julian felt a surge of pride, a foreign emotion when it came to his relationships. This woman, the barista he had hired for a day, had just disarmed his formidable mother and silenced his spiteful ex-fiancée with nothing but her honest conviction. The public display of vulnerability he had dreaded, the judgment he had expected, had been completely overturned by Chloe's grace. If you're feeling this unexpected shift, this dawning realization that true value isn't always what it seems, then hit that like button and let us know. Who here has found strength in the most unlikely of places? Share your thoughts in the comments below. Later, as the gala progressed, Julian found himself seeking out Chloe, wanting to prolong their conversations, wanting to understand the depth of her character. He introduced her to other guests, not as a formality, but with a genuine desire to see her shine. He observed her effortlessly charming an elderly couple with stories of Brooklyn's vibrant neighborhoods and engaging a stoic industrialist in a surprisingly animated discussion about community outreach programs for aspiring young artists. Each interaction further eroded his preconceived notions, each moment with her chipping away at the carefully constructed walls around his heart. He realized the $600, that initial transactional sum, was merely an entry ticket to something far more valuable, an encounter with authentic humanity, a connection that felt real in a world saturated with artifice. He found himself not only admiring her, but feeling a nascent protectiveness he hadn't experienced in years. He realized that for the first time in a very long time, he felt genuinely seen, genuinely understood, not as the ruthless CEO, but as Julian, a man burdened by expectations and a profound loneliness. Chloe, with her simple truths and unwavering kindness, was seeing him, truly seeing him, in a way Serena never had, in a way few ever did. The pretense of their relationship was blurring, replaced by a profound respect and an undeniable growing attraction. Yet despite the triumph of the moment, the shadow of Marcus Thorne lingered. His earlier comments, his knowledge of the daily grind, gnawed at Julian. Marcus was not easily deterred, and his ambition was as boundless as his cunning. Julian knew, with a certainty that chilled him, that this was merely the first skirmish in a much larger battle. The secret of their arrangement, the $600 that bound them, was a ticking time bomb, and Marcus was the one holding the match. He had seen the glint in Marcus's eyes, a promise of further investigation, a relentless pursuit to expose the truth, not just to humiliate Julian, but to destroy him. The gala might have been a success for Julian and Chloe on a personal level, a surprising victory in a social arena, but the war for Julian's reputation and for Chloe's peace was far from over. As the evening wound down, a sense of foreboding settled over Julian. The stakes were higher than just a single day's charade. They were about to spiral into something far more personal, far more devastating. The gala, once a whirlwind of polite smiles and veiled hostilities, eventually dwindled, leaving behind the hushed reverence of the Vance estate. Chloe felt a strange mix of exhaustion and exhilaration. She had survived, even thrived, in a world that was utterly alien to her. The weight of the designer gown felt lighter now, less a costume, and more a testament to her unexpected resilience. Julian, however, seemed to carry a heavier burden. The triumph of her interaction with Serena and Eleanor had done little to dispel the cloud that Marcus's earlier comments had cast over him. He was quiet, his gaze distant, lost in thought as he guided her through the sprawling gardens, away from the last lingering guests. The night air was cool and crisp, carrying the scent of late autumn leaves and expensive roses. A million stars, scattered like diamonds across the velvet sky, mirrored the opulence they had just left behind. Yet here, under their vast, indifferent gaze, a different kind of truth began to emerge. They walked in comfortable silence for a while, the crunch of their footsteps on the gravel path the only sound breaking the stillness. The air, thick with unspoken thoughts, pressed in around them. Chloe could feel the tension emanating from Julian, a tightly wound spring beneath his composed exterior. Finally, Julian stopped beneath the ancient branches of a weeping willow, its long, flowing tendrils creating a private, almost sacred space. He turned to her, and for the first time the mask of the ruthless CEO seemed to slip entirely. His eyes, usually sharp and guarded, were now clouded with a profound sadness, a vulnerability that stole Chloe's breath. "Chloe," he began, his voice barely a whisper, hoarse with an emotion he rarely allowed himself to express. I need to tell you something. Something I haven't told anyone in years." He paused, gathering his courage, his gaze fixed on a distant point, as if recalling a painful memory. "The truth is, this entire charade, it was born out of a profound loneliness, a desperate attempt to fill a void that feels perpetually empty." He took a deep breath, the confession visibly costing him. "My family, they expect perfection. A perfect life, a perfect partner, a perfect succession. And after my breakup with Serena and their incessant nagging about my lack of stability, I panicked. I just needed someone, anyone, to stand beside me, to deflect their relentless probing for just one day." His voice was laced with a self-deprecating bitterness. "I thought I could buy companionship, buy a solution to my problems, just as I buy everything else in my life." He looked at her then, his eyes pleading for understanding. "It was a cowardly act, I know, and I'm truly sorry for putting you in such a position." Chloe listened, her heart aching for him. She saw past the tailored suit, past the reputation, to the man beneath, a man haunted by grief, suffocated by expectation. "Julian," she said softly, reaching out a hand, then hesitating, unsure if she should cross that invisible boundary. He saw her hesitation and, with a subtle nod, encouraged her. "There's more," he continued, his voice gaining a new, fragile tremor. 5 years ago I lost my younger sister, Amelia. She was everything to me. My confidant, my best friend, the only person who ever truly saw me, truly understood me, beyond the titles and the money. She died in a car accident. Drunk driver." His voice broke, and he had to pause, composing himself. "After she was gone, it felt like the light went out of my life. I buried myself in work, built walls so high no one could get in. I thought if I just kept building, kept achieving, the pain would disappear, but it never does. A single tear, brave and defiant, escaped the corner of his eye, tracing a path down his chiseled cheek. Without her, I felt perpetually lost, unseen, just alone. Chloe's heart twisted. The raw honesty, the unveiled pain, struck a chord deep within her. She understood loneliness, understood the crushing weight of unspoken grief, the suffocating pressure of responsibility. She thought of her own father, his absence a gaping wound that never truly healed, the silent burden she carried for her mother and Leo. She knew what it was like to put on a brave face, to push forward, even when your heart was breaking. "Julian," she said again, her voice thick with empathy, and this time she reached out, placing a gentle hand on his arm. His skin felt warm beneath her touch, a human connection in the vast, cold expanse of his grief. "I understand more than you know." And then, in the intimacy of the starlit garden, under the weeping willow, Chloe began to reveal her own vulnerabilities, her own hidden scars. She spoke of her dream of pursuing photojournalism, a dream that had been put on indefinite hold after her father abandoned their family, leaving her, her mother, and a then 10-year-old Leo adrift in a sea of debt and uncertainty. "He just left," she recounted, her voice quiet, tinged with old pain. "One morning he was just gone. No note, no explanation. Just a mountain of bills and a shattered family." She spoke of the quiet struggle, the endless shifts, the constant anxiety of making ends meet, of keeping their modest apartment in Queens, a safe haven in a chaotic city. "Every dollar, every cent, it's a constant battle," she confessed, her gaze sweeping across the opulent gardens, the stark contrast to her own humble reality. "The fear of not being enough, of failing my mother, of failing Leo, it's a constant companion." Her voice cracked slightly as she admitted the painful truth that had driven her to accept Julian's outlandish offer. The $600, it wasn't just a random sum, it was desperately needed for Leo's upcoming tuition, for his textbooks, for his chance at a better future. It was a lifeline. Their shared moments of vulnerability deepened their connection in a way neither had expected. The forced intimacy of their fake relationship now transcended into something far more profound, built on the bedrock of shared pain and honest confession. In that moment, beneath the silent stars, the chasm of their different worlds seemed to narrow, bridged by the universal language of human suffering and hope. Julian saw past the barista, past the temporary girlfriend, to the fierce, compassionate woman who carried the weight of her family on her slender shoulders, a silent warrior in the urban jungle. Chloe saw past the ruthless CEO, past the impenetrable facade, to the lonely, grieving man whose heart yearned for genuine connection. It was during this tender, transformative exchange that the fragile bubble of their intimacy was brutally shattered. A twig snapped nearby, a sound too loud, too deliberate in the hushed stillness. From the shadows emerging from behind a thick cluster of rhododendrons stepped Marcus Thorne. His face was no longer masked by a playful smirk. It was twisted into a cruel, triumphant sneer. His eyes, cold and reptilian, glinted with malevolent satisfaction. "Well, well, well," Marcus drawled, his voice cutting through the intimate atmosphere like a rusty saw. "What a touching scene, a confession under the stars. How utterly theatrical." Julian spun around, a surge of cold fury coursing through him. "Marcus, what are you doing? Have you no decency?" Marcus merely chuckled, a dry, humorless sound. "Decency, dear cousin. Is that what you call hiring a common café girl to parade around as your girlfriend to placate mother? A rather desperate move for the great Julian Vance, wouldn't you say?" He held up his hand, and in his palm lay a series of photos. They were candid shots, clearly taken with a long lens. Julian pushing the stack of bills across the counter at the daily grind, Chloe's shocked expression, the $600 unmistakably visible. Marcus had been watching them, meticulously gathering evidence, meticulously planning this moment. "And that's not all," he added, his voice dripping with malice. He then produced a small, sleek, digital recorder. With a flourish, he pressed play. Julian's voice, surprisingly soft yet firm, filled the quiet garden, echoing the exact words he had spoken to Chloe hours ago. "Here's $600. Would you pretend to be my girlfriend for one day?" The recording ended, leaving an agonizing silence in its wake. Chloe's face burned with humiliation, a hot flush spreading across her cheeks. Her eyes, wide and brimming with unshed tears, darted from Julian to Marcus, then down to the incriminating photos in his hand. The weight of the $600, that desperate lifeline, now felt like a lead anvil pressing on her chest. She had known the risk, but the reality of exposure, of public shame, was far more devastating than she had imagined. Marcus, basking in their stunned silence, savored the moment. "Such a pathetic display, Julian," he sneered, his voice devoid of any genuine emotion. "To resort to such transactional arrangements. And to think, Mother believes you're fit to lead Vanguard Dynamics, to inherit Father's legacy. This little escapade proves you're utterly incapable of stable relationships, emotionally compromised, and frankly, a disgrace to the Vance name." He took a step closer, his eyes glinting with a ruthless ambition. "I intend to release this evidence to the press, Julian. The photos, the recording, the entire sordid tale. Tomorrow morning, your carefully constructed reputation will be in tatters. And as for your little companion here," he cast a contemptuous glance at Chloe, "her burgeoning hopes of a better life will be crushed, along with yours." He pocketed the recorder and the photos, his smirk broadening into a triumphant grin. "Good night, dear cousin. Enjoy the rest of your evening. It will be your last peaceful one for a very long time." With that, Marcus turned and melted back into the shadows from which he had emerged, leaving Julian and Chloe alone, surrounded by the crushing silence of betrayal and the chilling certainty of impending ruin. The stars above, once a backdrop for tender confessions, now seemed to mock them, their cold light illuminating the devastation Marcus had wrought. The $600, the symbol of their secret, now hung heavy in the air, a sword of Damocles poised to fall. The perfect illusion was shattered, replaced by the bitter taste of reality, and the looming threat of public humiliation that would destroy not only Julian's career, but Chloe's reputation, and with it, her last vestiges of hope for her family. The pre-dawn light, a cold, indifferent grey, seeped through the luxurious drapes of Chloe's hotel suite. She hadn't slept. The echo of Marcus's cruel laughter and Julian's voice, raw with the confession of a transactional arrangement, replayed endlessly in her mind. Her humiliation was a physical ache, a burning shame that spread from her chest to her fingertips. The $600, that desperate lifeline, now felt like a brand, a mark of her desperation, her compromise. It was one thing to know the arrangement was a pretense. It was another entirely for it to be laid bare, exposed to the world by a malicious hand, the transaction stripped of its context and painted as a sordid affair. She stared at her reflection in the polished surface of the bedside table, seeing not the woman in the designer gown from last night, but the tired barista, her dreams of photojournalism a distant, fading mirage. How could she face anyone, knowing that the world would soon see her as nothing more than a paid companion, a gold digger? More importantly, how would Leo react, her fiercely proud brother, whose aspirations she worked so tirelessly to support? The thought of his disappointment, his shame, was almost unbearable. Julian, too, was a phantom in the grand hotel suite he had insisted she keep. After Marcus's departure, a suffocating silence had fallen between them, broken only by Julian's murmured, "I am so sorry, Chloe." The words, though heartfelt, felt inadequate against the weight of the impending disaster. He had left her, promising to handle it, a phrase that usually instilled confidence but now felt hollow. How could anyone handle a meticulously planned public exposé? The morning felt heavy with an unspoken dread. The family's farewell brunch, the ostensible reason for this gathering, was scheduled for 10 o'clock. It was not just a meal. It was a ritual, a last opportunity for the Vance matriarch to survey her domain, for alliances to be subtly reinforced, and for Julian, the heir apparent, to present a united front. Now it would be the battlefield for Marcus's assault. Chloe, dressed in her own clothes, a simple pair of jeans, a plain white t-shirt, and a worn denim jacket. The borrowed gown lay discarded on a chair, a shimmering memory of a life that wasn't hers. She packed her small bag, an instinct to flee overriding any desire to witness the spectacle that was about to unfold. She would leave before the brunch, before the inevitable public shaming. Her dignity, however bruised, was the only thing she had left. As she made her way to the elevator, a text message pinged on her phone. It was Julian. "Please, come to the brunch. I need you there. Don't let him win." A wave of conflicting emotions washed over her. Fear, yes, but also a strange sense of defiance. Don't let him win. The words resonated with the fighter in her, the girl who had refused to give up after her father left, who had juggled 2 jobs to keep her family afloat. It wasn't about Julian's reputation anymore, or even the $600. It was about standing up to a bully, about refusing to be silenced, even when her voice trembled. With a deep, shaky breath, Chloe turned towards the grand dining room. The brunch was a subdued affair, a stark contrast to the previous night's lavish gala. The usual boisterous chatter was replaced by hushed conversations, nervous glances. Julian's absence was conspicuous. Eleanor Vance sat at the head of the long mahogany table, her expression a careful mask of serene disapproval. Marcus Thorne, however, was already there, positioned strategically close to Eleanor, a smug, expectant glint in his eyes. He caught Chloe's gaze as she entered, offering a small, venomous smile, a silent promise of the impending devastation. Chloe took a seat at the far end of the table, as far away from Marcus as possible, her heart pounding a frantic rhythm against her ribs. She kept her eyes downcast, tracing the intricate pattern on the china plate, acutely aware of the curious, speculative glances directed her way. The air was thick with unspoken tension, a palpable sense of anticipation for something terrible. Then Julian entered. He looked haggard, his usually impeccable suit slightly rumpled, his eyes bloodshot from lack of sleep. But there was a new resolve in his posture, a quiet determination that Chloe hadn't seen before. He walked directly to the head of the table, bypassing his usual seat, and stood beside his mother. He looked around the room, his gaze sweeping over every face, finally settling on Chloe, offering her a fleeting, reassuring nod. "Good morning, everyone," Julian began, his voice surprisingly steady, though a tremor of raw emotion underscored his words. "I apologize for my tardiness. There are some matters I need to address." Marcus, seizing his moment, rose from his seat, a triumphant smirk gracing his lips. "Indeed, Julian, some rather urgent matters, wouldn't you agree?" He pulled out his phone, his fingers dancing across the screen with practiced ease. "It seems there are certain revelations that demand immediate attention." A hush fell over the room. Forks clattered onto plates. Every eye was fixed on Marcus. Eleanor Vance's gaze, sharp and unwavering, bore into her nephew, a silent warning to proceed with caution. Marcus, however, was past caution. He projected the first image onto a large screen at the front of the room, the candid photo of Julian handing Chloe the stack of money at the daily grind. Gasps rippled through the room, whispers erupted, quickly followed by murmurs of scandal. Chloe felt a fresh wave of humiliation wash over her, her face burning. "As you can see, ladies and gentlemen," Marcus announced, his voice booming with feigned indignation, "our dear Julian, the CEO of Vanguard Dynamics, the esteemed heir to the Vance legacy, decided to take a rather unorthodox approach to securing a partner for this auspicious occasion." He then played the audio recording. Julian's voice, clear and undeniable, filled the elegant dining room. "Here's $600. Would you pretend to be my girlfriend for one day?" The room erupted. Shocked exclamations, furious whispers, and outright accusations filled the air. "Scandalous," someone hissed. "A paid escort," another added, their words cutting through Chloe like a knife. Her eyes welled with tears, blurring the faces around her. She wanted to disappear, to vanish into thin air. Julian's public admission of loneliness had been one thing, a tender moment shared in the dark. This, however, was a public crucifixion, her integrity shredded, her character maligned. Julian, initially stunned by the sheer malice of Marcus's betrayal, felt a surge of cold, righteous fury. But then he looked at Chloe, at her devastated expression, the unshed tears in her eyes, the shame that contorted her features, and in that moment, something shifted within him. He saw not just the damage to his own reputation, but the unjust pain inflicted upon a woman who, despite their transactional beginning, had shown him more genuine kindness and honesty than almost anyone he knew. Instead of denying the allegations, instead of allowing Chloe to be shredded by his family's judgment and Marcus's cruel machinations, Julian made a choice that stunned everyone, including himself. He took a deep breath, walked to the microphone set up for announcements, and silenced the room with a commanding yet strangely vulnerable presence. He looked directly at his mother, Eleanor, whose face was a mixture of shock and profound disappointment. Then his gaze hardened as it met Marcus's triumphant sneer. Finally, his eyes softened, locking onto Chloe's tearful ones, and a profound, silent apology passed between them. "Yes," Julian began, his voice cutting through the remaining whispers, clear and resonant. "What Marcus has presented is, in essence, true." A collective gasp swept through the room. Marcus's smirk widened, believing he had won. "I did offer Chloe $600. I did ask her to pretend to be my girlfriend for one day." He paused, allowing the weight of his admission to settle, then continued, his voice gaining a newfound conviction, a raw, unflinching honesty that held the room captive. "But the story, as Marcus has presented it, is incomplete. It lacks context. It lacks the truth." He looked at his mother, his eyes filled with a grief he had kept buried for 5 long years. "Mother, everyone, I stand before you today not as the infallible CEO you expect, but as a man who has been profoundly lost since Amelia's death. 5 years ago, I lost my sister, Amelia, in a tragic car accident. She was the only person who truly saw me, truly understood me. And without her, I buried myself in work, built walls around my heart so high that no one, not even myself, could get in." His voice trembled, exposing a vulnerability so profound, so unexpected, that it silenced even the most hardened critics in the room. "I became a hollow shell, driven by expectation, suffocated by loneliness, incapable of authentic connection." He then turned his gaze to Marcus, a cold fire in his eyes. "My desperation, fueled by years of unspoken grief and your relentless probing into my private life, Marcus, led me to make a desperate choice. I tried to buy companionship, to buy a solution to my problems, just as I buy everything else." He then looked back at Chloe, and his voice, though still tinged with pain, filled with a fierce protectiveness. "But what began as a lie, as a transaction, became something far, far more profound. Chloe Davies, this woman whom you have just humiliated, showed me more compassion, more honesty, and more genuine humanity in one day than most people have shown me in years." He continued, his voice rising, imbued with a passion that surprised everyone, including Eleanor. "She navigated this alien world with grace and dignity. She silenced Serena, not with aggression, but with truth. She connected with you, not with pretense, but with genuine interest. She saw me, truly saw me, for the lost, lonely man I was, not for the CEO I'm expected to be." His eyes, now burning with conviction, met Eleanor's. While the initial arrangement was a lie, Chloe's character, her integrity, and her genuine kindness were undeniably real. She did not ask for this money out of greed, but out of a desperate need to support her family, to ensure her brilliant younger brother could pursue his education. She is a woman of immense strength and unwavering integrity, and she deserves nothing but our deepest respect. Julian took a step towards Chloe, extending his hand, an unspoken plea in his eyes. "My attempt to buy companionship," he confessed, his voice ringing with a newfound conviction, "inadvertently led me to something priceless. What started as a fake relationship has, for me, transcended into a profound admiration and a sincere desire for a genuine connection with her." A stunned silence permeated the room, far more potent than the initial outrage. Eleanor Vance, who had watched her son with a mixture of shock and growing understanding, now looked at Chloe with an entirely new gaze. The raw honesty of Julian's confession, his unveiled pain for Amelia, and his impassioned defense of Chloe had created a profound shift. She saw not a social climber, but a woman who had in one day awakened a part of her son she thought was forever lost. She recognized the purity of Chloe's spirit, the quiet strength that Julian had so eloquently described. Marcus, for his part, stood frozen, his triumphant smirk slowly crumbling into a mask of dumbfounded shock. His meticulously orchestrated exposé had backfired spectacularly, transformed by Julian's unexpected honesty into a powerful public declaration of vulnerability and admiration. The $600, once a symbol of shame, had been redefined, now representing the unexpected bridge across a chasm of loneliness and class, leading to a truth far more profound than any lie. The moment of climax had arrived, not in Chloe's humiliation, but in Julian's extraordinary act of authentic defiance, an act that had turned the tables on Marcus and laid bare his own heart for all to see. The silence that followed Julian's impassioned confession was not an empty one. It was pregnant with 1,000 unvoiced thoughts, a profound collective shift in perception. The room, once a chamber of judgment and scandal, had become a crucible of raw emotion. Eleanor Vance, regal and composed for decades, now had tears welling in her eyes, not just for the unveiled pain of her son's grief for Amelia, but for the stark beauty of his honesty. Her gaze, which had once scrutinized Chloe, now held a deep, nascent respect. She finally understood. Julian, her son, had not been weak or foolish. He had been desperately, profoundly lonely, and this quiet barista had reached him in a way no one else had. Marcus Thorne, the orchestrator of this public humiliation, stood utterly exposed, his earlier triumph dissolving into a sickly, pale defeat. His carefully constructed narrative of scandal had been dismantled, not by denial, but by a truth so raw, so unexpected, that it rendered his malice impotent. The other guests, initially captivated by the drama, now looked at Julian with a mixture of shock, admiration, and a profound, uncomfortable recognition of their own unspoken vulnerabilities. Many of them, in their own gilded cages, understood the suffocating pressure of expectation, the loneliness that wealth often brought. Chloe, however, felt a different kind of turmoil. Julian's confession had been a shield, a powerful, unexpected defense. Her heart swelled with a complex mix of gratitude, confusion, and a burgeoning, terrifying hope. He had stood up for her, exposed his deepest pain, and declared a genuine desire for connection, not just for the illusion of it. Yet the sting of the initial transaction, the public exposure, still burned. A relationship, even one born from such an extraordinary turn of events, could not simply erase the foundation of a lie, however well-intentioned. It needed more than a public declaration. It needed time, truth, and a rebuilding of trust from the ground up. As the echoes of Julian's words faded, Chloe slowly rose from her seat. Her eyes met his, and in that moment, a world of unspoken emotions passed between them. Gratitude, regret, admiration, and a hesitant, fragile promise of something yet unknown. But she knew she couldn't stay. Not yet. This grand gesture, however moving, was still part of Julian's world, a world she barely understood. She needed to return to her own, to process the seismic shift that had just occurred. With a quiet dignity that belied her inner turmoil, Chloe nodded to Julian, a gesture that conveyed both understanding and a firm, gentle resolve. Without a word, she turned and walked towards the exit, her steps steady despite the trembling in her heart. She left the estate, leaving behind the stunned silence, the unraveling expectations, and the man who had, in one breath, publicly shattered his own facade and fiercely defended her. The resolution, Chloe knew, was not an immediate fairy tale. It couldn't be. Back in her modest apartment in Queens, the familiarity of her surroundings was both a comfort and a stark reminder of the life she had briefly left behind. The aroma of brewing coffee, the distant rumble of the subway, the stacks of Leo's textbooks on the small kitchen table, these were her realities. The $600, now neatly folded and placed inside her grandmother's old tea tin, no longer felt like a brand of shame, but a testament to a desperate act that had led to an extraordinary revelation. Julian Vance, chastened and profoundly transformed by his own public act of vulnerability, understood. He didn't pursue her with grand gestures of wealth or extravagant gifts that might reinforce the transactional nature of their beginning. Instead, he pursued her with an unprecedented humility, a genuine desire to bridge the chasm between their worlds, brick by honest brick. His first visit to Queens was not in his sleek limousine, but on foot. He arrived at her apartment building, looking utterly out of place in his tailored suit, a single unassuming bouquet of wildflowers in his hand, picked himself from a small patch of green near a public park. The gesture, so simple, so un-Julian-like, spoke volumes. He rang her doorbell, not with the impatient expectation of a CEO, but with the hesitant trepidation of a man genuinely seeking connection. Chloe, surprised to see him, invited him in. They sat on her worn sofa, the silence between them no longer awkward, but filled with a delicate, expectant tension. Julian spoke first, his voice soft, sincere. "Chloe, I am truly sorry for everything, for the way it started, for the humiliation Marcus caused, for putting you in that position." He looked at the wildflowers, then back at her. "I realized that day. that I was so caught up in the expectations of my world, in my own grief, that I lost sight of what truly matters. You showed me that. You showed me what authentic human connection feels like, and I want to learn." He then offered to support Leo's education, not as a transaction, not as a repayment for services rendered, but as a genuine act of friendship, a recognition of Chloe's sacrifices and Leo's undeniable potential. "Please," he said, his eyes earnest, "let me help, not as a benefactor but as a friend. I know what it's like to have dreams and face impossible barriers. Amelia, she always wanted to make a difference, and I see that same spirit in you and Leo." He spoke of building something real, of wanting to get to know the woman who had opened his eyes to genuine connection, not the persona he had hired. Chloe, empowered by Julian's newfound sincerity, began to actively pursue her photojournalism career. She started taking on small freelance assignments, her camera once again her constant companion. Julian, true to his word, offered quiet encouragement and practical support, never overstepping. He introduced her to a contact at a reputable news agency, but only after Chloe had built up a portfolio of her own, a testament to her talent and dedication. He never tried to buy her success, only to clear a path for her to earn it. Julian also took swift and decisive action against Marcus. He didn't resort to public retaliation. Instead, he used his considerable influence within the family business to expose Marcus's malicious actions and unethical dealings. Consequences, severe and lasting, were meted out, ensuring that Marcus's greed and resentment would no longer pose a threat to Julian or his nascent, fragile happiness. The world of corporate power, Chloe learned, had its own quiet, devastating forms of justice. Over the next several months, Julian and Chloe navigated a tentative courtship, a slow, steady rebuilding of trust. Their dates were simple: walks in Central Park, evenings spent discussing art and photography in her small apartment, quiet dinners at unpretentious restaurants in Queens. They had honest conversations, shared dreams, and slowly, gently, allowed themselves to explore the profound connection that had blossomed under the most unlikely of circumstances. He learned about her passion for capturing life's unspoken stories. She learned about his innovative vision for Vanguard Dynamics, a vision that extended beyond mere profit to genuine social impact. Eleanor Vance, witnessing her son's profound transformation, the renewed light in his eyes, the softening of his guarded demeanor, not only accepted Chloe but welcomed her. She began visiting Chloe in Queens, sharing stories of Amelia, finding a kindred spirit in the young woman who had brought her son back to life. Eleanor understood now that true worth was never measured in dollars or social standing, but in the integrity of one's character and the depth of one's heart. She saw in Chloe the same quiet strength, the same fierce loyalty that had defined Amelia. The $600, which had once felt like a symbol of a lie, now represented the unexpected bridge across a chasm of loneliness and class, leading to a future where Julian Vance, the once lonely CEO, and Chloe Davies, the bright barista, began to write a new, authentic story together. It was a story built one day at a time, one honest conversation, and one genuine smile at a time, proving that the most profound connections are often found in the most unlikely of places, and that sometimes the greatest treasures are revealed when we dare to look beyond the price tag. Their journey was a testament to the idea that even the most calculated transactions can, by a twist of fate and the power of human spirit, lead to an invaluable, unconditional love. The bonds forged in the fires of adversity often prove to be the strongest. Julian and Chloe's story reminds us that true connection often lies hidden beneath layers of expectation and pretense, waiting to be revealed by vulnerability and genuine courage. It takes courage to admit our loneliness, and even greater courage to see the inherent worth in another, regardless of their circumstance. This tale from the heart of New York City teaches us that dignity and authenticity are treasures beyond measure, and that the quiet strength of empathy can truly transform lives. If this story touched your heart, if you believe in the power of unexpected connections and the enduring strength of the human spirit, please give this video a like. Share it with someone who needs a reminder that hope can be found in the most surprising places. Subscribe to our channel for more stories that explore the depths of human emotion and celebrate the transformative power of genuine connection. May your own journey be filled with unexpected discoveries, profound connections, and the unwavering courage to seek your own truth, no matter where it leads you.